People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
Climate change is not only a threat for the end of the century, climate change is already a tragic problem of our societies.
The African continent contributes what I would call less than 6% of global greenhouse gas emissions. It is the continent that has been disproportionately affected by more frequent extreme weather and climate events.
Yeah, we come to you live from the beautiful port city of Durban. And Desiree, look, this place looks so pristine now, but just last week it was hit by violent storms. I mean, tornadoes. When last have you used the word tornadoes and South Africa in the same sentence? So we're going to break down the science. Is this related to climate change in any way? What is the science telling us about it? We're bringing in the experts, breaking down the science, and helping you understand better in terms of this global phenomenon that is climate change. Now, there's various aspects of climate change. One of it is global warming. Now, to understand global warming, we need to understand what the greenhouse effect is and what greenhouse gases are. Now, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane are examples of, these gases, these greenhouse gases that are actually closely associated to human activity. Now, these all play a part in terms of climate change. Now, before I explain further in terms of what this means for you and me, let's set the scene for you. Earlier on, my colleague Simpiwe Makanya took a trip out to the various areas that were devastated by the recent storms, and he filed this report. Watch.
KwaZulu-Natal, a province that's becoming more and more prone to natural disasters. Inclement weather patterns have become a regular occurrence. In 2007, high tides hit KwaZulu-Natal coastline. Durban was hardest hit, with the promenade, including shops on the beachfront, completely destroyed. 6 people were killed, and storms and lightning continue to frequent the northern parts of the province. This year alone, heavy rains, lightning, and strong winds have killed over 100 people. In April this year, the province experienced the deadliest floods in decades, with the city of Durban being the hardest hit. At least 90 people lost their lives, hundreds of homes destroyed, and thousands left destitute. Damage to infrastructure was estimated to be over R1 billion. Weeks later, the province was declared a disaster area, with President Cyril Ramaphosa cutting short an international trip.
The force of nature is so huge, and this is partly what climate change is about, that it just hits when we least expect it.
Over 200 homes were destroyed when a tornado hit Mpolweni outside Pietermaritzburg in November. Residents were left devastated. Many lost their livelihoods and belongings.
I have been living here for a long time, but this is the first time such a thing has happened. We are all shocked, but we are grateful to be alive.
It's these weather patterns that are sparking yet another discussion over climate change. But cultural myths still exist in some communities.
In the old days, there was a snake they called Inkanyamba. Unfortunately today, because of technology and all, some people, they don't believe there is a snake with 7 heads, which is hard to see the snake. That what happened recently. Before it used to be happen, but not in winter time, in summertime, because that is where in Kanyamba, they call it in Kanyamba, they used to change where they stay.
Questions are being asked if government was doing enough to adapt to this new phenomenon.
But it called on us to ensure that we improve the capacity of our municipalities, to provide more services and to ensure that drainage are cleaned and ensure that everything is up to the standard.
It's believed that others are of the view that climate change is yet to happen. Many told the SABC they lack knowledge and information on climate change. Simpiwa Makanya, SABC News, Durban.
Simpiwa, thank you very much indeed. We will be touching back with Simpiwa in a short while. He is stationed at Mpolweni in KwaZulu-Natal, one of the areas that was devastated by the recent violent storms. So he'll be talking to the people there as well. So let's get back to our conversation with regards to certain aspects of climate change. And one of them, as we were saying, is global warming. Now, to understand global warming, we need to understand what the greenhouse effect is and what greenhouse gases is. As I was explaining, we talk about carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide and methane, which is some of the examples of greenhouse gases that's closely associated with human activity. Now, they form a layer in the atmosphere. So picture this. It's almost like a light blanket, an ngubu, if you will. So what happens, the sun shines its rays onto the earth. Some of these rays are absorbed by the earth. The rest bounces back and is trapped by these greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. The rest head on back to space. Now that's a good thing, because we're talking about this greenhouse effect. It makes sure that the Earth stays a nice, cozy temperature. If we didn't have that, it'll be far too cold to sustain life. Here's the problem. Scientists are telling us that we are putting far too much greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So that light blanket I was talking to you about, it's getting thicker. It's becoming a gudri, as certain people know it here in this part of the world. So when the sun is shining its rays down onto the earth, some are absorbed, the rest are being trapped by these greenhouse gases. So the more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, the hotter it gets. That's the issue. Global warming in a nutshell. Let me bring in some experts who have a far more sophisticated brain than I have, and maybe try to break down the science for you. We are joined by Professor Roland Schultz from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. He's a climate change expert as well as hydrology, and we have Tandiwe Gumede from the South African Weather Service. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for your time. Professor, if I can start with you. Let's take this step by step, because the whole point of this broadcast is to help people understand what climate change is all about. We have the denialists out there, but we know that 97% of scientists believe climate change is real. Let's start off as a point of departure. What is climate change in a nutshell?
You've already started to give a good description of climate change, and that is that human activities have increased the greenhouse gases, the three you've named: carbon dioxide, methane and nitrous oxide. Carbon dioxide, for example, has increased since the Industrial Revolution from about 280 parts per million in the atmosphere to around about 420.
Right.
And similarly, nitrous oxide and methane have increased significantly in the past 100 years at an accelerating rate. Yeah. So as we get closer to the present, the rate of increase is faster and faster of these greenhouse gases.
So let's just explain. Some of these terms can be scary. When we're talking about methane, what are we talking about? When we're talking about nitrous oxide, what are we talking about?
Methane, in simple language, cattle, for example, emit methane.
Right.
And methane probably makes up around 15 to 16% of the greenhouse gases. But it is more volatile, and it is more dramatic than carbon dioxide, although its fraction is smaller.
Right.
Yeah.
So, Professor, I mean, people sitting in, for instance, Soweto, Hout Bay, Mpolweni, are saying, Blaine, why should we care? I mean, climate change, that's happening in far-off lands. Tell us, I mean, what's the worst-case scenario here? Ice melts in the Antarctic, Greenland, coastal cities, the world's coastal cities get flooded, less land, more environment refugees. Am I exaggerating? Is this hyperbole or is this reality?
As far as we know from the science, this is reality. but we must distinguish in climate change between two types of events. The one is we call a push event. A push event is something that happens gradually, like temperature is rising gradually. But inside of that gradual rise, we have pulse events, sudden events, like the tornadoes we've had, like floods we've had, like droughts we've had. So inside a gradual change, we have these dramatic events. Our question is whether these dramatic events are happening more frequently and more intensively. And those are the things that we grapple with in the sciences.
Right. So it's not as simple as saying last week's events is directly linked to climate change.
No, it is more complex than that. The world's weather systems are such that what happens in the USA or in Europe, we, in terms of carbon dioxide emissions, for example, we measure here in Cape Town about 2 or 3 weeks later.
Right.
So it's not something we can just simply say, this is a Northern Hemisphere problem. We're in the South, we have fewer people, we have less land, it's not going to affect us. Our climate systems are so dynamic that we are recipients of what is happening within weeks.
Right. You know, speaking about the world's weather systems, let's bring it down here to South Africa, Tandiwe. When we saw those tornadoes, I mean, it's very rare that we see tornadoes in South Africa, isn't it? What caused that?
Okay, it is quite rare that we see tornadoes in South Africa. Having said that, though, tornadoes are not a new phenomena that we can say is completely new within our province. What happened last week was we had a synoptic system, which we call a cut-off low, which is what resulted in those tornadoes happening in parts of KwaZulu-Natal. To add on to that, the synoptic system that was in place is not a new system as well. It's a similar system that we saw this year sometime during the Easter weekend. That was a similar system that occurred, which also resulted in quite a lot of damage, including flooding in some places. So for this one that we had from the previous week, it just so happened that that system was a very slow moving system, and it resulted in quite severe damage in certain parts of the country, including even the south coast of the country, where we saw the southern coastline of South Africa receiving quite significant amounts of rainfall, and there was an alert out for that, for possible flooding in those areas. Excuse me. And then for the KwaZulu-Natal province, particularly, there were quite consistent severe thunderstorms alerts that were being sent out, that we need people to understand that when we say severe thunderstorms, we refer to thunderstorms that may produce several things that can result in damage, including hail, hail of 19 millimeters or more, or small amounts of hail over an extended period of time, strong winds, whereby the tornadoes come in, as well as heavy rain that might lead to flooding. In our case in KwaZulu-Natal, we also have quite significant amounts of lightning events, where we have people dying because of being struck by lightning in most cases, particularly areas over the rural areas.
So I just want to understand in terms of, look, I want to get to in terms of the warnings in a little bit and how weather is forecast. But with regards to this cut-off low, we've experienced this before, isn't it? And one of the more memorable ones for some of us is the 87 floods that KZN or Durban in particular experienced. That was Des Moines, if I'm not mistaken. 83, was it? 83. So, but my understanding is that it normally happens during winter, these kind of flows, correct?
It does happen during winter, but also in some, it's not something that we can say it only happens during winter. It's like saying cold fronts as well. They are most common during winter, but they can happen in summer. It's a similar condition with the cut-off lows, whereby the disturbances in the atmosphere can occur at any time of the year, but they predominantly occur during the winter season.
I want to get to your systems with regards to predicting weather. Is it accurate? Do you have sound systems in order to predict weather? Because the reason I ask you this is that last week, this province was, I think it was called a red zone. The prediction was that there was going to be 150 millimeters of rain, you're going to have mudslides, gale force winds. But then it seems like the storm cell took a short left and headed out to sea. What happened? Did we get it wrong?
In forecasting, in the science world, we use probabilities most of the time. I'm sure if you've seen weather forecasts on television, we refer to 30% chances, 60% chances, as well as 80% chances, which most of the time is how far we can go to indicate how severe the weather event is expected to be. So in terms of did we get it wrong? No, we did not get it wrong. We did have the probability being increased during the course of the week as the models, which are what we most of the time rely on, were indicating conditions quite conducive to severe thunderstorms that might result. Most of the models were indicating quite significant amounts of rainfall, hence the amounts that you referred to of 150 millimeters in some places. And in some places, particularly over the northeastern parts, in district municipalities like Umkanyagote, those amounts more or less occurred if we do an accumulation of the rainfall over a period of 5 days, starting probably from the weekend, ending up until Friday last week.
I'm going to bring in my colleague Simpiwe Makani in a short while to discuss some of the issues that are being faced in certain communities in KwaZulu-Natal and how they're handling the recent weather. Prof, if I can just bring you in for a bit here. When we talk about global warming, when we talk about temperatures increasing, it's basically ice melting and seas rising. And we're talking about, in terms of temperatures, just 2 degrees Celsius, isn't it? Relative to pre-industrial times. That's all that is. It's that margin.
That again is the so-called push event. It's gradually going up. Again, within that we have days above 35 degrees Celsius, which do damage to livestock, which do damage to crops. We have fewer frost days within this 2-degree gradual rise. And frost days, people may say, oh, that's great, we have less frost. But with that, we have more pests and diseases. And so within this gradual change, it's the pulse events that are causing the damage. We've just had the tornado, we have less frost in winter, we have more pests and diseases coming up, we have health issues, more uncomfortable days. Just to give you an example, just a few kilometers up the road at Belito, where we've done a study, at the moment, there are in January and February about 5 uncomfortable days. An uncomfortable day is when the humidity is high and the temperature is high. 30 years from now, the projection is 15 days per month will be uncomfortable. Towards the end of the century, 24, 25, if our climate projections are correct. So it's those issues. And remember, that will affect the tourism industry, that will affect the laborers on a farm, it'll affect the school calendar, all sorts of repercussions. We call those the second order impacts. We sometimes stop at the first order impacts, more rain or less rain. And just having said that, more rain or less rain in different parts of the country, climate change is not all negative. There will always be, in a country like South Africa, winners and losers. Some people will benefit. We believe, for example, the sugarcane industry will benefit with more heat units and more yield per hectare.
So what do you say to people who will push back? And I'm talking about I guess you will call it the minority in the world that doesn't believe that climate change exists, and saying that, well, this is cyclical. It happens in cycles. This is natural. What would your response be?
There are a lot of natural cycles. There are natural solar cycles. There are natural longer cycles. There are natural shorter cycles. Winter, summer is one of these examples. But it's on top of these cycles that we are getting this gradual change. And to the denialists, we are measuring. We are basing our prognosis on measurements. Okay. And not on speculation. And very often the denialists have a personal agenda or a country agenda. We may think of the USA, for example. And there may be a political agenda for denialists. But at the end of the day, they cannot deny what we are observing.
Look, the facts are out there, and this is the whole point of this broadcast, is to bring the truth out there based on real facts and research. Professor Thandiwe, stand by. I'm going to come back to you. We're going to talk solutions when we come back. But I want to go now to my colleague Simpiwe Makanye, who is in Mpolweni. It's one of the areas that was devastated by the recent violent storms. We know that in KwaZulu-Natal since October 25th, about 19 people have lost their lives here due to natural disasters. Simpiwe, a very good morning to you.
Well, thank you very much, Blaine. We are coming to you live from Mpolweni. This is one of the communities that was hardest hit in terms of the recent bad weather that was experienced in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, where we are, Blaine. Most of the houses, as you can see behind me, were completely destroyed, with some being partially destroyed. Community members who were able to actually escape during the tornado here are now being forced to use those small tents that you see in my shot there. But with me, Blaine, to take this conversation further, I'm joined by two residents from the Mbeje family. Mama uYunis, asikubingelele masikwamukele endabeni, sibonge kakhulu ngesikhathi sakho. Impilo injani mayimva kwalesichotho esahlasele kule ndawo?
Ibenzima kakhulu mntanami. Sisole ngisho ukuthi singenze njani, sithathe nihlanganise nani, asinalutho. Sihlupheke kakhulu. Asazi ukuthi sizokwenza njani. Nezingane ezincane zilimele, nathi nje sibadala asazi sizokwenza njani.
Ma hlasimbe njengomphakathi wala Mpolweni, lungakanani ulwazi enalo malungana nesimo lesi ekekhunywa ngaso sokuguquguquka kwesimo sezulu?
Ngizothi bonke sikhalile ngomoya ophephukile, izinto zonke la sakhe khona nje akukho kusalile. Yebo ngani yami.
Okay. Masebonga kakhulu ngesikhathi sakho.
Yebo mananga.
Right. Blaine, in a nutshell, she's basically saying that it is still hard for them to actually make a living because most of the things that they had, some were completely washed away during the tornado which hit this area, leaving about 250 people without their homes. As you can see, the damage is still very much visible in the community of Mpolweni. But I'm going to welcome again Ubabu Anton Mbeje. Babu Mbeje, nawe sikubingelele baba sikwamukele endabeni bese siyakubuza ukuthi ngakube lesimo sezulu esisanda kwenzeka la endaweni esilimaze impahla nemizi kanjalo nabantu, into ungathini, ungayichaza kanjani into eqalayo ukwenzakala kule ndawo?
Khona ekubeni kwinto eqalayo ukwenzeka noma ke kwenzeka kodwa kungeze ngalolu hlobo, kuyamuke nje izindlu mhlambe lezo zodaka kuqhamuke imvula njengoba waqhamuke ikhukhula qhuma izindlu zodaka. Lokhu esikubona kwenzeka namhlanje kuyaqala kakhulu ukuqhuma izindlu zama-blocks, umuke izindlu zama-blocks ndizothayela ngendlela exakayo besuka othale bohla kwezinye indawo esingazi ukuthi basiwa yini khona.
So
kuzokwenza lento ke kwakuphuma ingane eminyango ngathi ngiyazibamba ingane ngiyifaka endlini, ngamani ngiyabheka eminyango ngibona othayela ba amaphepha bephephuka eminyango, mathi ngiyabheka kanti baphephuka endlini engikuyona. Emva kwalokho kwawimpahla kwawayindlu yangicindezeleka la esiswini embanjeni, yangishaya nale ngalweni, kwawa umntwana walimala, umntwana washayeka esiphongweni kakhulu, vuleka ingozi enkulu, wahamba ke wayebhedlela kungena yedwa nabanye ke abantwana.
Babu Mbeje, hlasimbe ulwazi emphakathini lungakanani malungana nesimo sokuguquguquka kwesimo sezulu?
Ngeke ngabeka kulungana kodwa ngabuka lento ingaphezulu kwamandla kakhulu endweni ezikenzeka njengoba ngichaza ngithi kuyaye kwenzeke kube khona umoya, kube khona izikhukhula lezo nje, kodwa ke kungonakanyalo hlobo okonakele ngalo namhlanje. Kulimala inkomo, kugenceka inkomo ebayeni, kwenzeka yonke into, kugenceka abantu, kwenzeka yonke lento mntana.
Okay. Babu Mbeje, nawo siyabonga kakhulu esikhathi sakho. All right, basically, Blaine, he's basically saying that it's the first time that an event of this nature has happened in this community. He's also explaining how the tornado hit the area. Their child, who's about 4 years old, is still in hospital at the moment, receiving treatment after she was actually injured during the incident. Blaine, the sentiment on the ground here is that the climate change is really upon us, and what the community members are basically saying is that not much really is is known about how to actually ensure that community members also play their role in mitigating against such incidents. Blaine, I'm not able to hear you, so I'm going to throw back to you in Durban.
Simpiwe, thank you very much indeed. Simpiwe coming to us live from Impolweni in KwaZulu-Natal, talking to the people that are really affected. But what many are saying is this insidious, problem of climate change, and it's gradual, but it's harmful. And we're in conversation with Professor Roland Schulze from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, as well as Thandiwe Gumede from the South African Weather Service. Professor and Thandiwe, thank you very much indeed for staying with us. Prof, let's just talk about the anthropogenic emissions. So we talk about those that are closely associated with human activity. And this is burning of fossil fuels, this is deforestation. And what I find very interesting is intensive agriculture is part of this. So agriculture on one hand is being affected by climate change, but on the other hand, it's adding to certain greenhouse gases. It's a bit of a pickle.
Yeah, agriculture is a contributor. In South Africa, it contributes around 16% of our greenhouse gas emissions. Most of our emissions are carbon-based, carbon dioxide-based. And in agriculture, we have to distinguish between crops and livestock.
Yeah.
Livestock, primarily methane. Crops, on the one hand, sequester the CO2. On the other hand, with artificial fertilizers, through nitrous oxide is a contributor. So some quite detailed studies have been undertaken in South Africa on the various contributions, which provinces are contributing, which sectors are contributing. So we have a large database in this country of what our contribution to climate change is. Globally, it's 1 to 1.5%.
Right.
So it's very little, but that doesn't mean we have to do nothing.
Thandiwe, we often see storm chasers around the globe going after these tornadoes or hurricanes. And there's a difference now between tornadoes and hurricanes, isn't it? Tornadoes, my understanding, it forms over land, and hurricanes over sea, correct?
Tornadoes, they can form over the sea, and if they form over the sea, they're called water spouts.
Okay.
Rather than that. So hurricanes are what we also know as tropical cyclones.
Yeah.
I think it's similar to the event that you mentioned that occurred in 1983.
Yeah.
As soon as we start giving them names, it's because they're tropical cyclones.
Right.
That's what we call them in South Africa. So hurricanes is a term that they use in the US. Different countries use different terms.
Yeah.
So really,
like in Asia, they use typhoons,
yes,
yeah? All right, so it's just the language. Also, I want to talk about the erratic movement of the so-called tornado that we saw. And you often see, we saw videos of people, wanting to get a shot of this tornado. How dangerous is it, and how quickly can it change direction?
Extremely dangerous thing to do for people to chase tornadoes, because there's no really a direct direction that you can say, or rather a distinct direction that you can say that the storm is going to follow, because of the winds that are within the storm being so severe and being so strong. So it can move in any particular direction at any point in time. So it's something that we would not recommend, but some people do it as hobbies.
The fascination is there. It's so hard not to pick up that camera.
Adrenaline. So but it's very, very dangerous, that we can emphasize.
So how would you categorize a tornado like that in terms of its size? What goes into classifying it?
When we classify them, we categorize them in terms of the damage that results from the tornadoes. And then we give them certain scales depending on the damage that resulted from the tornado.
Right. Professor, let's talk about solutions. It's so easy to talk about it, but it's far more complex than that, because climate change has a lot of complex dimensions. What can you and I do now here, living in South Africa and around the African continent, in order to mitigate the effects of climate change?
Well, the first thing we have to do is to adapt.
Right.
There's a lot we cannot change, and therefore we have to change by adapting. And the problem with adaptation is that there are, in our country particularly, more vulnerable people and less vulnerable people. There are more vulnerable regions and less vulnerable regions. So we have to study these carefully, and look at various forms of adaptation. There's long-term adaptation, there's short-term adaptation, and again, a lot of people, particularly in our country, the poverty-stricken ones, are much more vulnerable. Somebody who lives in a shack in a city near Durban is very much more vulnerable than somebody who lives in the suburbs. And so the socioeconomic impacts and the socioeconomic effects come on top of what nature is presenting us with.
Right. So some of the other solutions would be clean energy, solar, those kind of things. Are they practical for us here in South Africa?
They are becoming more practical over time. We are blessed in this country with a huge amount of solar energy, particularly in certain provinces, the Northern Cape, Northwest. And there are certain big mines which have massive solar systems in place already. In the Eastern and Western Cape we see windmills, so there's wind energy. The one we haven't tapped yet is the one behind us, wave energy.
Right, yes.
Which is something one perhaps needs to look at. But these things will come, they will also become cheaper over time. At the moment, wind energy and solar energy is relatively expensive. As mass production and efficiencies rise, they will become more commonplace.
I want to talk about wave energy. I just saw a documentary recently about what looked like a craft headed out to sea, and it has some sort of mechanism that spins around and creates energy. I mean, that could work here in South Africa.
Low tides and high tides.
Yeah. I mean, so these are some of the innovative ways in order to mitigate against climate change. Tandiwe, when you look at the forecasts over the past couple of years, what stands out for you? What are some of the things or the trends that you're picking up that has, that's startled you a bit?
Okay. When we look at the past few years, I would say some of the trends that we're picking up is mostly the flooding that's occurring. The flooding that's occurring in most parts of the province. We can't say that the severe weather events are becoming more dominant because they're not really, but the severity of the actual incident is becoming quite severe if we had to compare to the previous years and how these particular systems were affecting some parts of the country.
Look, yes,
as
Professor.
a hydrologist, I'd like to come in here if I may.
Of course.
Very often it is not that the flood is becoming worse in terms of the 1 in 10 year flood or the 1 in 50 year flood, but we have more people living on the land, we have poorer people living on the floodplain. God made floodplains to be flooded, not to be lived on, and so the impacts for the same severity of a flood is much more nowadays than it was 50 years or 30 years ago.
I think it's worthwhile emphasizing the point and go back to drawing the link between extreme weather and climate change. Talk to us about the nexus between extreme weather and climate change.
Well, we anticipate that because the atmosphere is getting warmer, that it will become more energized.
Right.
Tandeko is the one to talk about that rather than me. But because it becomes more energized, we are probably going to have more violent events in the future. Can we measure this as yet? The answer is no, certainly not in South Africa. We've been involved in a study in Limpopo province, for example, looking at tropical cyclones, which you mentioned. Are there more tropical cyclones in the projections into the future? We cannot pick that up yet. It's a complex subject, but one we have to be prepared for. And that's where the adaptation again comes in.
Complex subject indeed, but as we've been saying for this broadcast, we're trying to break it down and understand better the science. When the Professor Tandiwe talks about being energized, what does he mean?
He means that because of the warming up of the atmosphere, the instability of the atmosphere, the chances of the instability is becoming quite high, or the atmosphere becoming more unstable. The chances are increasing. And when we have higher instabilities as well as other factors that contribute to the formation of thunderstorms, that means that if that energy is there and it's sustained over a long period of time, chances of severe thunderstorms resulting in quite severe damage is going to increase.
So I guess one of the big questions, and you probably get this even in social circles, when is the rain coming? I mean, I live in Johannesburg and we've been praying for rain. It's been erratic a bit. You see the Eastern Cape plagued by drought. here, although you get rain in certain parts, there's certain parts of KwaZulu-Natal are desperate for rain. What's the prediction in the next couple of months?
Okay, the prediction in the next couple of months, unfortunately, it doesn't look very promising. If we look at the 5-month outlooks that we do as the Weather Service, it's not showing a clear indication as to whether or not we can expect above normal rainfall for the upcoming season, or can we expect below normal rainfall for the upcoming season, which I would say at this point, since it's showing a no clear indication, it can be a good thing. It's a 50-50 chance. On the next update, it might show an above normal likelihood, or it might show a below normal likelihood. So at this point, there is no distinct solution, rather, or a distinct answer to your question as to can we expect more rain or can we not expect more rain.
Prof, talk to us about the research being done in South Africa and how much are we contributing to the global conversation. I mean, I was listening to the president speak a couple of weeks ago where he was saying that Africa's contribution in terms of global emissions is less than 6%, yet we are far more disproportionately affected by the effects of climate change. How much are South Africans or Africans in general contributing in terms of research with regards to climate change?
I'll focus on South Africa where I know what's going on. We have major research organisations at University of Cape Town and Stellenbosch and Pretoria at UKZN. We have amongst the top climate scientists internationally who contribute to the IPCC reports, that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change reports. So I believe that our research contribution is heavyweight compared with our contribution of climate emissions.
No, Professor,
and we are doing very practical research. We're not doing airy-fairy type theoretical work. We are doing on-the-ground research at district municipality level, at catchment level. eThekwini's climate change strategy is a very strong one, and it's backed up by solid research.
And this is the whole point of it, isn't it? Is to get to the nub of the situation and get to the grassroots issues in terms of what are people experiencing. Because many would say, why are we talking about climate change when there are other pressing political issues to talk about? But it's affecting you and me. It's affecting our very being. So it's important, I guess, to break down the science and let people understand more about this global phenomenon. Professor Thandiwe, thank you very much indeed for your time and your experts. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, there we go. We're continuing our conversation with regards to a special focus on climate change. In the next segment, we're going to come back and speak to government officials. We're going to speak to Greenpeace Africa as well as farmers and find out, are we ready? Are we adapting in terms of climate change and the effects of climate change? That's next.
Thank you so much, Blaine. And in relation to that focus on climate change, we're asking you here on the show, what do you understand about climate change?